Okay, we're connected. You may begin.
Terrific. Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Shaughnessy. I serve as the chair of the Professional Counselor Advisory Committee for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Thursday, December 4th, 2025. I ask that the members of the advisory committee respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that's being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Jim Kilmartin.
Present.
Good morning. Melissa Briggs. Here. Amanda Brown.
Here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Michael Countryman.
Here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Samantha Holloway.
Here.
Good morning. Jason Lee.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Masha Maksudi. Oh, she's not here? Okay. Vanessa Perez.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Amanda Petrick Gardner.
Here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Amanda Wade.
Here.
Good morning.
Morning.
I note the following BSRB staff also present. David Fye.
Thanks, Laura. And Leslie Allen is here as well.
Oh, hi, Leslie. Good morning.
Hi. Good
There
morning.
you are. I see you now. I feel like I'm on Romper Room, like pointing at all the circles. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Laura. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meetings Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. No time has been reserved for public comment today, as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, which allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On October 20th, 2025, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I believe there may be one person who clicked over to the conference call. So if there is someone on the conference call line, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please feel free to do so now. I don't hear anyone, but if I hear someone introduce themselves later, I will let you know.
Terrific. Thank you so much, David. Okay, the first thing we need to do is have an approval of the agenda. You received an agenda in your email packet. I need a motion and a second.
I move to approve.
Thank you, Jim.
I second.
Was that Amanda?
Vanessa.
I'm sorry. Hi, Vanessa. Sorry about that. Okay, we have a second from Vanessa. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay, the agenda is approved. Thank you for that. The next thing on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our previous meeting, which again you received in your packet. Does anybody have any questions about or changes to the minutes? And if not, I'll need a motion and a second to approve those.
I'll make that motion to approve.
Thank you, Michael. No, that was Jason.
Jason will be second.
Jason is second. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All in favor of approving the minutes from the last meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, the minutes have been approved from the last meeting. Thank you so much for that. And now David Fye will provide his executive director's report.
All right, thank you, Laura. We'll start with some BSRB operations updates, and then we'll touch upon a legislative item, and then some items from the most recent board meeting. And then it's been 5 years now since I became executive director for the BSRB. So I thought as part of my report, I would just kind of highlight some of the many changes that have occurred over the 5 years. I think for some of you that are long-term members on the advisory committee, it will be interesting to kind of hear about some of this information and kind of see how things have changed over the 5 years. For some of you that are new, this might be some helpful history of the BSRB and some of the things that we have worked on and some of the things that we're still working on implementing. So um, I will go ahead and start with the operations updates first. In terms of the annual training for board members and advisory committee members, you all should have received an email from me with a link to access the annual training. In the past, we've done this a few different ways. Once upon a time, this annual training was actually done by legal counsel for the board, but that was a bit time consuming for the attorney who works to assist the board. So I took over that responsibility shortly after I started. And in the past, we have done that a few times where we've done that training in each of the 7 advisory committees. But in an effort to become more efficient, we discussed some options earlier this year, such as maybe offering some different times and having people sign up for them. But to try something even more efficient than that, what we're going to do this year is we're just offering the training on demand. So it's recorded, it's on the YouTube channel with the link that I sent you. You can access that training. It's the same material that we've covered in past years, but you can access it that way. And you also have an adjustment where you can increase the speed. And so it's an hour long, but it could be even shorter if you adjust the speed on the playback. But it covers a lot of good information in terms of, the expectations for board members, roles and responsibility of board members and advisory committee members. It talks about some of our policy documents and why we have those and the history of how those have been established. We also go into some unique aspects of the board and the committees under the board, like the advisory committees, in terms of those being created as a product of a state agency. And so because of that connection, there are certain laws that we must be mindful of, like the Open Meetings Act and the Open Records Act. And so we touch upon some of that during the training as well. So if you can, by the end of this month, December 31st, go ahead and watch that training. And once you've completed that, send me an email so I can cross you off my list. I do think that it is helpful. Even if you've seen that training before in previous years, it's a nice reminder of some of the things to be mindful of. One of the things that we always, caution people of, if they're used to working in different groups outside of state government, you may be used to working with everybody in the group outside of the groups and just sending emails back and forth and getting a lot of work done that way. But as a product of a state agency, we have to make sure that if it involves the majority of members and it's interactive communication, which can include, talking in person, talking remotely, even email communication. If it deals with a subject matter relevant to the work of the committee, that really needs to happen during a public meeting. So we can send one-way communications to you. You can always do that. If you want to contact, less than a majority of members of the committee, that's perfectly fine too. But some of those unique aspects of state agencies and following the Open Meetings Act, we always like to give people a reminder about what those rules are, and then give them some level of comfort, hopefully, to let them know exactly where the lines are, and so they can feel comfortable working with the other members, but also not running afoul of the laws there. And then similarly with the Open Records Act, all of you are professionals and you're all familiar with, staying professional in your communication, but sometimes, there can be different types. There's one level of formality when we're working on an official report. There can be a different level of formality when we're working on things like emails or different things like that. So we just like to always remind members of the advisory committee, when you're dealing with records, even a record like an email, those things could potentially be subject to an Open Records Act. And so we always want to make sure that people are mindful of, what those records can be used for. And so, and I did see that Masa Magzudi did join the advisory committee, so she's in attendance as well. And I'm going to go through a few more items in my report here. But if you could just go ahead and try to complete that training by the end of the month and then send me back an email and I'll cross you off. In terms of another item, I do encourage everyone to continue to utilize CE Broker. This is an optional thing that the board set up for licensees, but it is a nice way for you to document completion of continuing education. And so if you're coming upon the renewal of your license, 10% of all of our licensees are renewed randomly when they renew their license. And at that point, if you're pulled for audit, you do need to show documentation of your continuing education hours. If you have voluntarily chosen to use your free CE Broker account, instead of going the traditional way of sending materials back and forth, if they're already uploaded, our staff can access those, can approve you through the audit more quickly. And so it's just a more efficient process. And so, but we do want to remind everyone, if you haven't updated or if you haven't activated a CE Broker account, all of these accounts are free to use. The company does offer options for paid accounts that do provide some additional services. So if you choose to do that route, I've heard mostly positive feedback, but that's entirely at licensee's discretion. We did make sure that we got everyone a free account, and so that is an option for you as well. In terms of our Jurisprudence Live project that we've talked about a few times, we are hoping to launch that later this month. This was something the board had looked at in terms of whether or not to require a jurisprudence exam for licensure or to pursue that as a path. The board does value that licensees are aware of the rules in Kansas and the state-specific requirements, and also information concerning disciplinary issues, but we didn't want to require another test for licensure or potentially outsource it and have individuals have to pay another fee. So we took this on as a service to licensees. We have been testing different technology to see what will work the best for this process, and I think we're close. Like I said, I hope we can launch it this month. But when we do, we will send out a notification to everyone when that will be. It'll still be an hour long. Individuals will be able to log in and essentially answer jurisprudence type questions live, and then we'll be able to document their attendance and then approve them for a free hour of continuing education credit. So, so looking forward to launching that, hopefully, like I said, later this month. In terms of another item that we are actively working on implementing, the board recently made a decision to begin requiring background checks for all licensees. The board decided to make this a requirement for new applicants for the board. And so we are working with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation on some language for emergency regulations that we hope to put in place. These would be of a temporary nature followed by permanent regulations. But we are creating this for individuals who are applying new. So once this is a requirement, it would not affect existing licensees, but there would also be a mechanism for existing licensees to be able to opt in to voluntarily do a background check. And part of that has to do with the counseling compact. One of the things that we have been actively working with the counseling compact on is that background check requirement, which is just to kind of give you kind of an update on that, we have a section for the counseling compact a little bit later, but just to let you know about this background check requirement, essentially when SIPAC was started as one of the first mental health compacts, it had a requirement for a background check, but that compact put in place a rule that said all state agencies that don't require a background check have 10 years to come under compliance. And during that 10-year period, your practitioners can still practice under the compact, but states need to move this direction and begin to require background checks. The counseling compact broke from that precedent and said, instead of following the tradition of SIPAC, we are going to require that everyone have a background check completed before anyone can practice. And so for the states that didn't require a background check, like Kansas, Florida, Iowa, many other states that didn't require background checks, they have been kind of working to resolve this issue so that their practitioners would be eligible for this. So we are working on this as well. We have been working with our licensing host to be able to build in markers to show when people have completed their background checks and if there were any issues. As I said, we've also been working with KBI to make sure that our existing statutory language is good with the federal government, and it appears to be so. but we also need some language to basically clarify the process, how people can go about getting this background check and how people can opt in because it's kind of an unusual process. So if you are currently licensed, what our goal is that you'll be able to do this for the purpose of eligibility for the compacts. For people who are applying from the beginning, they will just have that as a new requirement. We are hoping to begin to require this on January 1st, but that kind of depends on some of the timelines for different agencies to review and approve that temporary regulation language, and whether or not the committee that oversees that emergency process can meet once we have that all through the appropriate channels. So we're working on that. Hope to have it by January 1st, but if not, then shortly thereafter. In terms of another operating update, the survey reports, we're in the process of wrapping up that big activity that we did earlier this year. We launched surveys for all 7 professions. We did 6 of our professions first, and then did social work in the middle of the year. And so since that point, we've been working on converting our draft reports to final reports. We should have those all converted to final reports by the end of this month. Once we do have that finished, we will send out a notification to all licensees that says the final reports are now posted on the website, and to thank them for participating in the survey process too. So that is the time frame we're looking at. We also are planning to have a comparison report, and we hope to have at least a draft of that comparison report available this month. I'm unsure if we'll be able to have the final report for the comparison this month, but we should have the final reports for the earlier reports, and then at least a draft of the comparison report available. So the board should be able to look at that in the first meeting of the year in the spring at the January board meeting. Moving to a legislative item, I'll just talk briefly about the budget for the BSRB. So as a state agency that is a fee-funded agency, we don't receive any money from the state general fund. However, we operate based on the revenue that we collect from license fees primarily. And then every year, all state agencies must submit a budget to the government to be reviewed by the Division of Budget and also the Legislative Research Department. And all state agencies are required to submit that by October 1st, and it is requested by September 15th. So we did turn in a budget. Last year's legislature approved adjustments to fiscal year 2025 and also a budget for 26 and 27. So this year, what we submitted was adjustments to the current year, fiscal year 26, and then also any adjustments to the budget year 27. And so we submitted at basically the same amounts that were approved by last year's legislature, so no increase in our expenditures. There was, with one slight modification, there was a technical adjustment. The legislature put in a salary increase for state employees, which began in fiscal year 26. But because of one of the quirks of state government, the money was put in for 26, but not for 27. And so to be able to continue that across and not treat it like a one-year bonus, we will need them to basically allow us the authority to spend that same amount of money in 27. It's one of the weird quirks about some agencies having 2 budget years, some have 1. We see this anytime the legislature does something like this during a year in which agencies have 2 budget years, but we think it won't be an issue. They should be able to continue this. So, with that correction, it should be the same amounts approved by last year's legislature. Also, if you are familiar with the legislative process, every year in the spring, the legislative session begins. It usually goes for about 90 days. Generally, in past years, what had happened was agencies submit budgets, the governor makes a recommendation, and then when the legislative session starts, the governor delivers the budget recommendation, and then the budget committees for the House and the subcommittees for the Senate begin to look at every state agency budget and make further adjustments, but they use the governor's recommendation as the starting point. But that is not necessarily what has to happen. So last year, the legislature decided to try a different path. And what the legislature did is they began to review agency budgets in the fall interim during this time period right now. When the legislative session started, the governor is still required by law to put out a governor's recommendation for budget items, but the legislature is not required to follow that. And so the legislature decided to have their own budget bill. And so last year there was a legislative budget bill, there was a governor's budget bill, and budget committees were kind of looking at both. And This year, they are following a similar path. So for the larger agencies, they've had some individual budget reviews and hearings. For the smaller ones, like the BSRB, that we've been open to provide any information that was requested, but they haven't specifically had a session for the BSRB budget. So there's 2 more meetings by that budget committee before the start of the session. We'll be responsive if they have any questions for us. Otherwise, when the session starts, we still expect that there will be a budget committee that reviews our budget, makes recommendations that will be forwarded to House Appropriations, and then potentially the Senate could either just adopt those recommendations or they could have us present information to the Senate subcommittee. But essentially, we are right in line with the new process. We're unsure if this will continue in future years or how long this new process will continue, but that's where we're at right now. So if any of you like to follow budget information, that's what's going on. And so all those meetings by the legislature are broadcast on their YouTube channel. So if you ever want to follow that information, you're welcome to take a look on the legislature's website or on their YouTube channel as well. Now I'll shift to some items from the most recent board meeting that did take place on November 10th. The board is continuing to work through the unprofessional conduct items. Each board meeting, the board is going through a giant grid of all of the recommended changes for all 7 professions, and then trying to determine should the language be synced up for each of these items. And I think the board is doing a great job at going through and really having thoughtful conversation to see, should there be some unique aspects given one profession versus the other, or are there items that may be potentially missing from one profession that should be added for consistency? And so I expect that there will probably be 1 or 2 more meetings that the board will be reviewing and making recommendations on these items. When the board does come to a final conclusion, they will take a vote to recommend whatever changes they've ultimately decide on. And then those will be put through the process of the regulatory changes. And so it'll be we will submit that language to the Department of Administration and then the Attorney General's office. And then when they have approved that, it'll be open for public comment for 60 days. And we will post that information on the website when it is open for public comment. We hope to have a lot of feedback because this does affect all 7 professions. And we would like to hear from individuals, concerning these potential changes. So that's where we're at with that. Additionally, there was also a discussion about the board's complaint review committee at the last board meeting. Traditionally, the board has had a subset of board members that review complaints against practitioners and make recommendations or make decisions on if there was a violation, and if so, what the appropriate remedy should be. The board is currently at 12 members and the CRC has been at 5 members, but there was a desire by the board to expand membership on the CRC to 6 members. So that was expanded. And the new member serving on the CRC is the board chair and master's level psychologist, David Anderson. So now there will be 6 members of the CRC as of this month. And so they'll be continuing to work on different items, but did want to let you know if you are familiar with some of the disciplinary processes, that was a recent change. Now I'll go ahead and I'll highlight some of the changes that have occurred over the past 5 years. It's just kind of a fun way to sort of recognize some of the work that has involved many, many different people. The board has done a lot of work initiating legislation or regulatory changes. The advisory committees, each of you has played a really important role as well in terms of looking at the regulations, making recommendations on changes. And I just want to kind of remind you of all the positive changes that have occurred in a relatively short period of time. So basically, when I became executive director, that was November of 2020, and the world was very different back in 2020. But one of the things the board had just recently done at that time is they had changed licensing systems. So they had previously worked through an access database for a lot of the licensing information, but to make that more secure and accessible, it was switched over to a licensing system called My Licensed Office. But the My Licensed Office, while it has been better, we've had some limited resource, and some of the different things like payments and other things have not been as integrated as they could have been with a different system. So the board has made the decision to move to the state's enterprise licensing system under Acela. And so now we are in the process of moving to that system. And for the last year, we've met with OITS, the Office of Information Technology Services, and we have gone through all of our existing processes, all of our existing forms, forms for all the professions to help them understand our processes. And now they are in the process of designing more efficient pathways. So when we do switch over, people will have new abilities like to apply for licensure online and to make payments directly when they're submitting their materials, which should avoid, minor mistakes like people accidentally paying for the wrong type of license and things like that. And so, or skipping a question on a paper form. And so we're really looking forward to making this switch. It'll probably still be about a year away from when we go live, just based on the time it takes to design the system and then test it out. But we're really looking forward to that change. So the licensing system has been a couple of changes that are either made or in the process. We also designed, with the assistance of the Information Network of Kansas, a payment portal on the BSRB website that made payments a little bit easier and a little bit more secure. We also were able to increase staff at the BSRB. We had shown that over the last 10 years, the number of individuals overseen by the board had increased by thousands, but we had no change in total employees. So when I started, there were 9 employees. Now there are 12. And that has allowed us to create a little bit more specialization. So we've had people assisting primarily with training plans to help more people reach that clinical level of licensure more quickly. And we've had more people that have been able to work on things like reciprocity applications, and we've had a renewal specialist, and it's worked out really well. But being able to expand our staff, I think, has been a benefit to our license applicants and our licensees. We've also been able to improve the technology for our staff. When I first started, there were a number of desktop computers, and when staff couldn't be in the office, that really tied their hands a bit in what they could use. They had small little 2-in-1 devices, but we were able to transition staff from the desktop computers to laptops, which was also part of our plan to build a remote work plan for some employees that was consistent with the Department of Administration plan. So we were able to put that up too, and that was supported by staff, and people really appreciated that. We were also overhauled the agency's website. You may recall our previous website with Sitefinity. We did an overhaul of that and changed a lot of our functionality to move to Granicus. That made it more accessible for people with mobile devices, and it also created some more clear pathways. If someone was coming to our website for one thing or another, we have some clearer ways to navigate to some of those resources. We revised our document retention schedule, and while that was a lot of work behind the scenes, what it meant was we had a number of paper documents here at the office, and we were able to shorten our schedules and work with the Historical Society so that our staff members were able to move about 40 tall file cabinets of documents for licensees to the Historical Society for archiving. And by clearing that out, we were able to create essentially space for the new permanent staff members. And so that was really helpful to be able to clear some of those paper records and also give staff members some more space. We were able to launch the free CE broker accounts for all licensees as a tool to help out during the audit process. We had an increased number of board members attend national meetings, therefore we could have a different voice and represent the state more effectively at some of those meetings. And we've had staff members or board members volunteer and run and serve in leadership positions now too. So for the marriage and family therapy profession, board member Mary Jones will be the new president-elect for the Marriage and Family Therapy Association. I currently serve as treasurer for the American Association of State Counseling Boards. We've also had other board members that have served on other committees, but by getting more active at the national level, our voice can be heard more effectively. One of the examples of this for the psychology profession, there was a movement to potentially require a second test. They called the EPPP2, and that was opposed by a number of states as an unnecessary test and an increase in cost. And we were able to partner with Texas and a number of other states to work together to oppose that at the national level. And through our work and advocacy in that area, we were able to convince the board to move away from that plan at the national level, the ASPPB board. And so that is not going to be a requirement. They're working on an integrated test now with more feedback. But, if we're not at those meetings, if we're not volunteering and in a position to where our voice is respected, we lack the ability to make those changes. One of the things I've talked a little bit about in terms of these compacts and what has made them so tricky is that when these compacts were initially written and designed, we were not invited to the table to have a voice in that process. And as a composite board, I think we have some things that work out really well in Kansas, but there are some unique aspects of our board that were not considered or were not valued when some of these compacts were written. I think now, if these compacts were written, they would invite us to the table or at least give us the opportunity to influence some of those decisions, so that it would fit our licensure system a little bit better. And I should mention too, in terms of being active at the national level, we've been able to do presentations together. Laura has been wonderful attending the National Board for Certified Counselor meetings and representing the state as the commissioner for the Counseling Compact. And Laura and I were able to do a dual presentation together at the NBCC conference. And Mary and I were also able to do a presentation together at the Marriage and Family Therapy Conference, talking a little bit about our survey process and that information. So that has been a nice progression and an improvement, I think, over the last few years. We've also made some changes to the advisory committee process. When I first started, the policy document said advisory committee positions would last for 2 years and that individuals could request reappointment. But essentially, what we had is we had some individuals on the advisory committees that had been in those positions for a number of years. So we had to do a little cleanup to make sure that we were still following that 2-year process. And so now when people come to the end of a 2-year term, I reach out to them to say, would you like to be reappointed? And if they want to request reappointment, we go through that formal process. And then though they are reappointed at board meetings. And so we just have a cleaner process now. And I'm really happy to say too, that with the advisory committees now, almost all of them are maxed out on members or very close to it. And so we have more voices from more licensees. And I think that's part of a good improvement in the process too. We launched the surveys this year. That was a new project. We were able to collect feedback from everyone. I don't think that's ever been done before. At least it was never done during the 5 years that I've been here. But it was nice to reach out and just collect a lot of feedback from all of the licensees in all 7 professions. Concerning some of the licensing changes, after the state had passed a version of universal licensure, which lowered the years of practice to gain a license for military members, military spouses, individuals that reside in Kansas, and those that intend to reside in Kansas. This is primarily for people that had a license outside of Kansas, and we're going through the reciprocity path. The board looked at that new law, which lowered the years of practice down to 12 months. And the board corresponded with initiating legislation to lower the reciprocity requirements in the regular statutes to match, so that they would also be 12 months, which has allowed us to license more people from out of state that are moving to Kansas or, are interested in doing telehealth into the state by having similar requirements. So the change in reciprocity, I think, has been a positive change as well. For individuals that are coming to the end of a license period and they haven't been able to complete their continuing education hours because they've had an extreme situation that has happened, maybe something affecting their own health or someone that they were caring for. In the past, if you had not completed your continuing education hours, you really had no choice but to allow your license to expire because you didn't want to sign the attestation claiming that you completed your hours when you really hadn't completed them. But to allow more people to continue to stay licensed, we developed a new process that was put in law that allows people to request up to 3 months of additional time solely for the purpose of completing those CE hours. And if they can show that there was an extenuating circumstance for needing that additional time and they are approved, they will renew their license and then have that 3-month period to complete their hours. So because of that change, we've allowed more people to stay licensed who otherwise potentially would have retired or at least let their license expire and then potentially come back in the future, maybe not. So we were able to keep more people licensed that way. We also were able to provide incentives for people to come back to the profession. The board is able to establish a 6-month temporary reinstatement license for people that have been out for at least a year, but were interested in coming back to the professions, but maybe they hadn't finished all their CE hours needed to fully reinstate their license. What these 6-month temporary reinstatement licenses allow is for someone to work up to 6 months, and then they can start earning money to pay for those CEs while they're finishing them out. And then once they finish all the CE hours, they can get their license fully reinstated, and then they're back in active status. So that's been really helpful and a really positive aspect too. As advisory committee members, a lot of the professions had discussions about opening things up in terms of the in-residence requirement, especially for applicants that came from non-accredited schools. The previous language, as it defined in-residence, talked about individuals having to obtain certain credits at the physical location of the school, but we've had a number of schools start online-only programs, and so that created an issue with individuals having trouble meeting those alternative standards for licensure. So a lot of the advisory committees made changes to allow not only at the physical location of the school, but also through the screen to screen, face to face by screen, through live teleconferencing. And so that in residence opening up has allowed us to license more people through that remote access. We also were able to increase things like temporary licenses for individuals. I believe when I started, the temporary licenses for professional counselors lasted only 6 months, and we were able to increase those and standardize those for all professions. So they are all now 2 years. The cost of those temporary licenses were also, there was a range that was pretty wide, and we were able to standardize that where the temporary licenses are all $50. And that was a good improvement too. Now, hopefully, people don't have to have a temporary license for that long. They can pass the exam and then move to a permanent license. But for the sake of consistency and fairness, we moved to the 2 year standard and the $50. And for a lot of individuals, that was a decrease in how much they otherwise would have paid for a temporary license. We also were able to lower the number of hours required for clinical licensure down from 4,000 to 3,000 hours for most professions to make sure that we were consistent across all the professions. The number of supervision hours was also decreased from 150 hours to 100 hours. There was also the creation of a new student temporary addiction counselor license, which has been a nice pathway for that addiction counseling profession that has individuals that have 60 credit hours in addiction counseling or a related field. They have to have an agreement with their school and also a potential employer that they will work under supervision and they will continue to take classes towards their degree, at which point they would be able to move to an addiction counseling permanent license. And so it's been a nice pathway for people to start to earn some money as students, and then also for some of those employers to have people in a pathway towards becoming a permanent employee that way. We were able to create a temporary candidacy license for our bachelor's and master's social work applicants who come from schools that are in the process of becoming accredited but aren't accredited yet. Given how long that licensing body or that accreditation body takes to accredit, we had a situation with online schools for social work that were running into this issue. So now we have a clear path for those schools to meet that standard, and we can move people through that process a little easier. And then also in terms of our other changes, Leslie Allen, the assistant director, and we provide presentations to a lot of different groups that talk about how to apply for licensure, what to expect as a professional in terms of disciplinary responsibilities, and we've continued to expand who we provide that information to. So we have launched some other opportunities for information, sometimes with licensees, sometimes with students, sometimes with employers, and then we continue to expand the number of programs that we're talking to and sharing information with. And these were things that were just off the top of my head for the past 5 years. I'm sure we could come up with a list that would be twice as long or maybe 3 times as long, because you all do really do a lot of really important work and we've made a lot of really positive changes. But I just thought this might be helpful to kind of walk through all of these changes. Now, the only drawback is when you change this many things at all the same time, it can be a bit challenging. And so I do really want to compliment the board for being willing to go forward on all of these initiatives, and also the staff members. When I started, there were a number of staff members who had been with the agency for several years. I can tell you this is unusual, and I'm knocking on wood as I say this, but over the 5 years that I've been here, we've been able to expand our staff by 3 members, and we've only had one staff member leave. And I know that's incredibly unusual, but I really feel like it's a testament to the staff that are here. They really do take an active role in their work. It's really important to them, the work that they do. And I really think that they have been a huge resource for me and a good testament to the agency. So I want to thank them for all their hard work as well. So I'll go ahead and end my report now and just see if you have any questions over any of the items I talked about or anything else.
Thank you, David. You guys dizzy when you hear about all the stuff he does and the staff does? And that doesn't even include like whenever he comes to the board and gives reports, this printout of all the meetings he attends. I counted them last time, David, and it was 32 meetings. So 32 meetings on top of, I mean, every month in 1 month on top of all the things he's naming. And he's not that was off the top of his head. That's not even all the other stuff that he does. We've quit yelling at him to get when we get emails at 11 o'clock at night. He's the hardest working person. Couple
Thank you.
things. First of all, we at the last board meeting, we took some time to recognize David, and the board went around and everybody talked about their appreciation of him and how hard he works. And he started during COVID, and as did I, and it took a little while for everybody to kind of get used to, first of all, what was that? And then second of all, who we hired, who we hired. It became very clear very fast that we hired somebody who was going to be exceptional, and he's really delivered. And so we were really able to celebrate him at the last board meeting, and it was nice to hear everybody talk about the things that they did. A couple of them that I'll say out loud. Um, Going to national conferences, really, I love going to them because you realize, one, how lucky we are to be in Kansas. I love the way Kansas operates, especially when I hear some of the things that go on in other states, and that we're a composite board and that we are as collaborative as we are. And so I really, one, appreciate those conferences because again, you just kind of get that perspective, that national perspective. People come up to us because of him. I'm pointing at you, David, bye, and want to know, how does this work? How do you do that? And that's because he's recognized and appreciated on a national level. Um, he says yes to a lot of things that really give Kansas exposure and have given Kansas a great reputation on a national level. And that is because of David Fye. Yeah, I go stand up there with him and do presentations. But when we walk, I'll never forget when we presented about the survey, all the hands were out. I want a copy of the survey. People were coming up to us and saying, I've never wanted to do a survey of my licensees, but now I think I'm going to do it. I mean, and that's because David Fye can really communicate well the importance of those things. So I just, wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for what you do for our state on a national level. If Kansas has any bad reputations, I don't know about it, and it wouldn't be because of anything you're doing. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Laura.
Another thing I'm really excited about, the board ends up saying yes to a lot of things. I mean, the progress that we are able to make is because we say yes to a lot of things. And the reason that we say yes to a lot of things is because he has a lot of really good ideas. Leslie Allen and David Fye are this institutional knowledge that I can't even, I still try to get my head around. I mean, when you talk to Leslie, she'll say, oh, that's statute, this or that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, for 7 disciplines. Okay. But, they come up with great ideas. It's easy to say yes to a good idea. So I just want to say that, when you think about how to make jurisprudence something that our state, jurisprudence is now not something you have to pay for, and another test, it's, oh, you get CEs for that, and it's something the state offers. That's going to catch on. Other states are going to really like that. In fact, 2 people came up and talked to me at the last conference we were at about that because it's a good idea. So when we are able to make progress, it is because there are lots of good ideas, and they are coming from the staff. The staff is on the ground, just like we are as an advisory committee. You guys are out in the community and, in schools coming up with good ideas. They are coming up with good ideas, and it's easy to say yes to those. So I just wanted to say those things out loud. And just thanks for all you do. I mean, it's amazing. I know you didn't even touch on it. You just named a fraction of things that you do. That being said, does anybody have any questions about the things that David talked about in his executive director report? Anybody have any questions or comments about them? I have one thing that I wanted to come back to. On the background checks, as far as you know, I mean, that as soon as we have that emergency order in place, is that the last thing that we need to make the compact live?
So we've been meeting with our licensing host too, and they've been building in markers in the system to keep track of who all has a 60-hour degree versus any individuals that would have less than a 60-hour degree. That was one of the requirements that was in the language of the model law. So we've had them build that. So they're in the process of building that into our system. So we have that, but that should be in place by the end of this month. So that's being built. And then also they're building a new marker in for basically everyone in the system. That would be a check to say, when did you have a background check? And so for people that have had the background check, they can be pulled too. The counseling compact was designed in an unusual way. For the other compacts, like with SIPAC, they have it set up so someone will apply for essentially something called an e-passport, where it will determine if they're eligible for the compact. And if they are determined eligible, then they will apply for what they specifically want to do, either telepractice or a limited number of days of in-state practice. So that one is designed a little bit different, but there are these different checks. When you apply for it, your eligibility is determined. What counseling did for their compact is they did it kind of in reverse. They said, we want to have states build us a list of everyone who's eligible for the compact, and then send that to the compact commission, so that if someone who's eligible decides to apply for a privilege, we can check on that list to determine, oh, they're on that list, they're eligible, we can give them a privilege. But it puts a lot more pressure and a lot more work on the states to have to build that list of everybody who's eligible on the off chance that someone on that list would apply. So that's why it's a little bit of an odd process, because the eligibility determination is being done for a lot of people that may never even want to practice. But that is, to answer your question, the licensing part of it too, building in that marker for the 60-day and then building in the marker for the background check. But like I said, I think that part of it should be done by the end of this month, so that we can have a list, and then that will be transmitted to the counseling compact. Because right now, what it's looking for is they need us to send them a list of who's all eligible. But at the moment, nobody's eligible because of the background check type thing. So once that's built in, and then people start opting into the background check requirement, then we can start to send over that list. So if we can get the background check approval started either on January 1st or shortly thereafter, then we should be able to put those markers in once people start doing the background checks, and sort of building that list of eligible people to send over to the counseling compact.
Wow. Wow. It just feels so close.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's,
And
you know,
just
where,
kind of as an update too, to my knowledge, there's only 2 states still that have been able to go live with the compact. So these things that we're working on, we're not unique in this way. The only states that have been able to go live so far are Arizona and Minnesota. And so we do want to go live as soon as possible. I think it's unfortunate that they broke from the precedent of SIPAC, that they didn't allow people to start practicing while states were moving on the background check. But that is something that was a decision, by the commission. And I understand why, because for the states that do require background checks, that's the method that they had preferred. And they decided to take sort of, in my opinion, a hard stance on that. But unfortunately, it has created some issues. And I think also one thing I talked to a legislative committee about just recently, because they were curious about the implementation of the compacts. When we joined SIPAC, we were sort of one of the later states to join. And so when we joined that compact, it was already all set up. And so our practitioners could start to practice under that within 6 months. And so it was already ready. With counseling, when we passed that legislation, there were still sort of a lot of the processes to build that compact that were still taking place. Commissioners were still being appointed. A lot of the rules were still being set up. So I think it created maybe an expectation that we would be able to go live a little bit sooner. But unfortunately, these compacts take some time to get all these rules in place. And I think it's a really positive step the compact has launched with 2 states, but I think it's also a reflection of how many states are struggling with these requirements, that only 2 are live to this point.
right. Yeah, it's good feedback. Any other questions about the compact or any of the other things that David gave in his executive director report?
Oh, I will say this too. And I don't think we've talked about this before, but I do want to clarify this. When the compact language was passed, it included a way for the state to charge up to a $25 fee for anyone who had a home state license in Kansas who wanted to participate under the compact. I just want to let you all know the compact has decided that when they are issuing the privileges, they will collect an administrative fee that way to help fund the compact. So because they're not charging us a fee for state membership, we're not passing any of that fee on to you. I mean, we're not asking you to pay any of that money because they're funding themselves basically. So the way it's going to work is that once all the states go live, or when any states go live, if you apply for a privilege, you will be paying whatever that state has determined their privilege fee would be. You're also paying an administrative cost to the compact. So as the state of Kansas, we're not going to charge you anything for membership in this compact. If there's any fees that will be charged to you, that'll be when you're applying for a privilege in different states. So that fee will be zero, and we don't intend to increase that fee above zero anytime, and unless they start to look back and say, now we're going to start charging states for membership, we may have to reevaluate it. But at least right now, we don't have any plan to charge our in-state licensees any fee for compact membership.
So I really like that because, so Kansas is one of the cheaper on the spectrum of fees. We're $25. There are some that have made their fee commensurate to what their licensure fee is. I'm up to $250. So we are by far on one of the least expensive states to join for the compact. And well, we feel like that's fair. It's a reasonable thing to do. And also it'll hopefully draw more people into our state to provide service.
Yeah.
David, have you had any feedback from Minnesota and Arizona about how it's going?
Well, from what I can recall, I think Minnesota had set their privilege fee pretty low, and I think Arizona had held to close to what their license fee was, as their privilege fee. And it sounds like when those two states went live, there were a lot of people from Arizona that got a privilege into Minnesota because the privilege fee was so low. I don't think there's been very many people who got in Arizona because there's really no incentive given the amount, in my opinion. But just based on the numbers, there haven't been a lot of people from Minnesota getting it in Arizona, but there have been a lot of people from Arizona getting that in Minnesota. So I think, as to your point, the idea was, if you still have to have a home state license somewhere, so you're already paying a license fee to your home state. The reason to set these out-of-state privilege fees low is because the goal of the compact is to expand. And so if someone was licensed in 3 states and they drop that down to just keeping their home state license, maybe they can now have a privilege in 7 or 8 states for the same cost if you keep those out-of-state privilege fees low.
Yeah, I mean, economics. It'll be really interesting to see if some of if this data plays out over time, if some of the states with higher fees change their fees. Be interesting to see how that goes. Any other questions? We've unintentionally moved on to number 5, updates on the counseling compact. But I want to make sure that we make room, if anyone has questions for David about any of the other things in his report, and if not, we can consider this part of the compact conversation as well.
And I didn't mention this earlier, but in terms of meeting with our licensing host to build those things into our system, talking with KBI to make sure that we're doing that, working with, right, taking care of that regulatory language. I also had a meeting just recently with the director of the counseling compact, just to kind of make sure too that what they were looking for, we could meet their expectations. And I did make a push with him. I said, I really do think it'd be helpful if the compact commission wanted to reconsider their decision on the background checks, at least to give states a little bit more time to get this into place and allowing people to practice. And he didn't say that they were considering making that move, but we will continue to work under the existing format. I am hopeful for not just us, but for a lot of other states that maybe they do choose to revisit that in the future. But if not, we still have a good path forward. I think we should be able to resolve our current issues here in the near future.
Luckily for us, we're pretty close, so that's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sure there are other states that are much farther away, but at least for us, we're close.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Anybody else have any questions for David Five? Okay, let's move on. Can we consider that our professional counseling compact conversation? Is that what we just had? I think it is.
I think so.
Okay, if anybody has any questions about the compact, speak up now. If not, we'll move on to old business. So the first one is review of the surveys of licenses, and there were two places that we were going to look. I hope all of you got to read through the narratives at the back. Boy, it was really, I went through them a long time ago and I went through them again, and I have all kinds of questions and feedback. Does anybody have anything they want to discuss from those two segments of the survey?
Well, and Laura, I'll just go ahead and frame that first question.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
That was question 16 for the LPCs and 17 for the LCPCs. And, for anybody who's viewing this video, just as kind of a quick reminder, these survey reports that we put out earlier this year, they have a ton of information. It's really good information. So we asked each of the advisory committees to kind of look at two specific questions per meeting to kind of divide and conquer the content. And for this meeting, what we had asked individuals to look at were the last two questions of the survey. And this question that we will talk about first, it says, based on your experience as a licensee in Kansas, do you have any recommendations on additional ways the BSRB could protect and serve consumers of services offered by BSRB licensees? And it's interesting, when Laura and I were talking about doing the presentation on the survey, some of the reluctance, I think, from other states were saying, I don't know that I necessarily want to open us up to criticisms or different things, but, that's one of the best ways for transparency. And also, if you don't know what the issues are, it's really hard to kind of focus on how do you solve and make improvements in the future. So I'm really happy that the board was willing to open up the discussion and have a question like this on the survey, because I think it does go to the heart of the mission of what we're trying to do, is that as a state agency, we're trying to protect the public. And so we did ask both of the different levels of professional counselors how we can better protect the public. We also received some comments on the survey in general that said, it seems like you had a negative slant on the survey. A lot of your questions were saying, do you see negative issues in this area, or do you see any problems in this issue? And part of that is because of our focus. We were trying to identify problems to solve. So I will try to do my best to balance out the framing comments here, because there were issues that were highlighted, but I also want to highlight when people said, maybe you're doing a good job, or I've had a good experience too. And so for the LPCs, 198 individuals answered that. The most common response was no. And so I do want to highlight that out of the, half the people who responded to the survey question, we were giving them the opportunity to provide us any feedback on ways we could better protect the public. And half of them said, I don't have any recommendations on ways you could do that better. So I do want to take that and at least note that that's notable. For some of the items that were highlighted, though, there were individuals that were asking for advocacy on behalf of the profession, which is a little outside of our role, but we're definitely not opposed to, trying to make sure that all the professions have good representation and are highlighted. There was some advocacy request for things like reimbursements and things like that. And again, it's a little outside of what we do, but I've had some conversations with the Department for Aging and Disability Services this year to make sure they understand our levels of licensure, our tiers, as well as possible. And then also our temporary licenses, our provisional licenses. We do offer several different paths to be able to practice. And so we've had some conversations about things like that. Hopefully that will increase potentially reimbursements for practitioners. There were some comments about requests for us to allow providers to give services in other states. And I think maybe that comes down to we could increase our communication in terms of, we don't really have control over that. Every state has the authority to say who can practice in their state. But I think that was something that people had highlighted as an item. Faster license processing time, and that was to be expected. Some people have had positive experiences with that. Some people have had experiences where they felt like we did not meet their standards. And so we do want to note that, and that's something for us to work on. More communication from the BSRB regarding licensure information and in response to inquiries. more communication about resources such as movement to online applications, more regulations on private practice, and LPC testing. And I didn't mention this during my report, but we are, as one of our items in our to-do list, we are working on building a newsletter that we hope to be able to send out to licensees with more updates on potential changes or other items the board is working on. So that is something we're working on as well. The full answer for that question are found on page 87. But just like I said, to kind of balance out and highlight the range of comments, there were some positive notes that I did want to share. One comment was BSRB experiences have always been smooth for me. Someone said, my experience with the BSRB has been entirely positive, and I cannot think of any other ways the BSRB could help to protect consumers. Someone said, it seems like the BSRB is on top of everything. I don't know that I go that far, but we're working on it. We're trying to do the best that we can. Someone said BSRB is doing a great job. Someone said the KSBSRB is extremely helpful. And someone said the ladies at the BSRB are wonderful. And there were other comments of things that we can definitely work on in the report, but I do want to highlight that and pass it along to the staff because I know how hard our staff works and we do stress things like good customer service. Concerning the LCPCs who answered the survey, there were 160 respondents, or actually 301 who answered the question. A little over half, 160, responded with no. So, like I said, that is notable that when given the opportunity to provide us direct feedback, if there was anything we could do better to protect the public, over half said no. Some of the items that were highlighted were perhaps more communication or regulation on artificial intelligence and telehealth, more communication and support regarding the complaint process, better customer service, things like coverage when one employee is a specialist in a certain area. And those are some good comments. We're definitely going to give some thought to that and ways we can improve some things. Faster license processing times, increased communication on upcoming changes such as background checks, requests for to offer free CEs, and possibly establishing an impaired provider program. The full answers can be found on page 92. And just to highlight some of the positive comments again, someone said believe the BSRB is doing a great job. The board is doing a good, satisfying job now. I feel supported by the board, and I'm proud that our licensure is as extensive as it is. I think the BSRB is doing a good job. I think the system in place works well as it is. I've been very appreciative of the support and responsiveness of the board. I've had good experiences with BSRB since I became an LPC. I worked up to the LCPC and then got approved for certified supervisor. Between the website and being able to call and reach a live person when needed, I'm not sure there was anything else that could have been helpful. I appreciate what you do. I think the BSRB does a great job protecting consumers, and I think the BSRB does an exemplary job. So just kind of wanted to share those comments. Before we move on to the next question, I know each of you reviewed the summary information and had the opportunity to review all the individual comments in the back. And I know that some of those were positive, some of those maybe were critical, some of those were just requests for additional ways of doing things. And so I want to turn it over to you now that I've kind of framed it, and let me know if there were things that stood out to you or things that surprised you or things that you noted that potentially the advisory committee could work on, or perhaps maybe that the board could take an action on.
Thank you, David. What are some things you noticed?
I think that some of the things that people were asking for are maybe outside the scope of what BSRB is, there for. And perhaps like some of the training opportunities and things like that. I feel like that's on us as clinicians to seek out. I also thought it was interesting that it was kind of both sides of the spectrum. So people were saying lower expectations, but then other people were saying higher, you need higher standards. And so I feel like that's actually a positive thing because it feels like we kind of fall in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah, you're seeing a variance in, professional experiences and personalities about what seems right to expect. Yeah, for sure. Well, David, I have a question about the comments about offering standardized language for consents. Is that something we can provide, or is that something more that would come from an organ, like a governing body like the ACA? it really, I thought that was an interesting request. Did you see that one?
Yeah, so in the past, we've kind of walked a little bit of a line in terms of whether something is a requirement or not. One of the areas that we've tried to kind of split the difference to be helpful in are working on sort of the supervision manuals that we've talked about a little bit.
Mhm.
And so I think there might be a way that we could potentially um, maybe highlight some items that could be found in there. Um, I'm honestly curious. I know Leslie has had more of an active hand in terms of working on sort of the supervision guidelines, and I'm curious what her thoughts would be on that. If that's something that we may be able to provide like a template to someone on, or if that goes a little bit outside of, if it crosses a line into maybe providing advice. So.
Um, so I have been told in the past we have to be very careful because if the board says something, people take that as the board requires you to do this. You have to use this language. However, I think it's something that we could maybe run by Tim and our attorney and ask him if there's a way to make a disclosure and then offer the language.
Leslie, I'm going to put that on my list for our supervision subcommittee that we're going to start after the first of the year. We
Okay.
have Amanda Wade, Vanessa Perez, and Masha Magsudi have agreed to be on that subcommittee, and we'll start our work at the beginning of next year. I'm going to put a list. I'm going to write that down as something that we need to invest.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
No, that's great. Yeah, because it's not in statutes or regs, so then how, you're right. We don't want to walk the line of this is a requirement when it's not a requirement.
Right.
Right,
You don't
Okay.
have to use our language.
right. Um, I, started making categories. I can't help but organize things in the way that I do it. And a lot of the feedback that I saw in the two questions, the two narratives, blocks of narratives were about awareness. I didn't know this was happening, or I'd like more information about this. And that is something that we have started to take on, whether it's going to making sure that we have FAQs on our website that answer a lot of the questions that come up. More transparency about things will show up in our newsletter and any other way that we're going to choose to communicate. And even some of the feedback and some of the other narratives, make sure telehealth sticks around. Um, Market, we want to know how to save CEs. We're doing a lot of those things, and people don't know about them. And so it is going to make a difference for us to have direct communication on an ongoing basis with updates, changes. I think that's going to help tremendously to really make us a little more visible about what we do. I think that's going to be really good for our licensees. Um, Another one I saw that I thought was interesting was explaining somewhere the pathway to licensure. It's too complicated. And somebody who made those templates, David, there were some templates made earlier this year and presented to the board. Do you know what I'm talking about? Was it Emma that made those?
We had some different staff members working on little one page front and back, sort of a at this stage this happens, and then this stage, and then after this it goes to this. But it was sort of some boxes with arrows, and we were trying to build that. And I think we'll have to revisit that with staff to see if we can have those posted. I think maybe some of them have been posted, maybe for the clinical track, but I think there are more of them that can be designed. So.
Were you handing those out when you go talk to colleges?
No, we just kind of have a PowerPoint that we kind of show, and then they get the slides for the PowerPoint. But
Got it.
that's a good idea because that is a quick little summary of the path. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're going to want to know. Um, yeah, there were just so many things that to me went into the awareness bucket.
Mhm.
Either I don't know this is happening and it is, or I want to know when this happens. So I think, us really owning the possibility of direct communication is going to make a huge difference for our licensees. I have other things on my list. What are some of the things that you have seen or, that fall under the category of, other things we should or can be doing. Anybody have any feedback? One thing that I know is frustrating for us as an organization and a board is to address non-licensed people providing counseling and how frustrating that is because we don't have jurisdiction over them. If I call myself a coach, but I'm doing counseling, there's not a lot that we can do. David, do you have anything you want to add to that? Because I know that's frustrating. We've probably all experienced that before with people.
Yeah, it is frustrating. I mean, I think if anyone believes that the statutes are violations, are the statutes and regulations are being violated, that they can file a complaint with the board against someone doing unlicensed practice. But some of those questions really come down to um, like licensed professional counselor, that term is protected, but there's a lot of other type of counselors. And so there are carve outs for different types of individuals that are doing things like, let's say, religious counselors. There's also some carve outs when individuals are students and providing services, within the scope of being a student and at their educational institution. And then there are people who do things in sort of a gray area where there are life coaches or other individuals, and it gets really tricky to see, under the analysis, is it something that is clearly under the scope of practice of something that would require licensure for a professional counselor, or is it something different? And so a lot of those things go into the analysis, but it does get very complicated, not to mention the free speech issues that could potentially be raised. Speech versus conduct is also interesting in this discussion too. But Michael, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, you kind of made me think about this, David. One of the things, and I don't want to say this as if they're doing something purposely wrong, but something I've seen quite a bit in the professional field is the LPC going into private practice along with somebody who maybe is clinically licensed, but they're not actually participating in supervision like they're supposed to, or at all. And that's a fairly common theme that I see. There's this belief or understanding that they can just go open a private practice as long as I'm working with somebody or near somebody with a clinical license, that I'm good. But it's my understanding is that if you're not clinically licensed, you have to have continued supervision hours with a licensed clinical person. Is that still correct?
And Leslie might be the able to explain kind of the distinction here a little bit better than me.
So if the person is not clinically licensed, they have to be under supervision, and we use supervision to mean working toward a clinical license. And that's very detailed and laid out in regulation. If they're not doing that, then they have to be under direction of a clinical licensee. And there is a definition of under direction in the regulations. And we send that out as an attachment when we issue licenses. It's a separate bright piece of paper that says you can't practice independently. You have to be under direction. And, but yes, I think it is something that is often overlooked or not understood very well. But yes, they cannot be practicing independently, even if there's a clinical licensee next door in their building. They have to have a specific person providing them direction or supervision. And when they renew, they're supposed to give us that information.
And I would assume that if a clinically licensed individual has hired several LPCs in their practice, then they're taking on an additional responsibility for their ethical practice.
If yes, they could be if they're the people providing the direction. Yes.
If they're providing the direction, but it's not a formal contracted supervisory relationship.
Right. But they still have to, they're in the definition, it does explain like the minimum requirements of what they need to be doing, and they do need to keep track. The big difference in under direction is that the supervisor can kind of make the call on how often the supervisee and the under person, I guess, the person that's under direction and the director have to meet based on their skills. So if they're supervising someone just out of school, they may meet quite often and then less as they move, through the years. But so there's not the rigid, you have to meet this many hours for this much client contact. It's more open. But it
Leslie-
is an official relationship. It's not just, it has to be clearly that they're providing the direction.
Leslie or David, and not to get too off topic, but was that going to be a discussion item at some point? I don't know if I saw that, like kind of firming up what under the direction means and like concretely what those hours mean. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that are under the direction, but clinicians are like, I just call them when I need, or they're there if I need something, but they actually don't use them at all. And that's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, and this
Yes.
this is an item on the board's agenda. It was on the agenda for the most recent board meeting, but we weren't able to get to that item
Okay.
in the meeting. But that is a carry forward item, and the board's going to take a look at, how can we flesh out the under direction more and
Great.
clarify more when people have to be under direction too. So
So
Great.
is there an obligation of the LPC that's working in a private setting to inform the BSRB of whom they're operating under? Because I mean, for instance, and again, I'm not shooting any arrows and I'm not going to bring any names up. I do know a practice in which there is no LCPC, but there's 3 LPCs, and the person who is the clinically licensed person is not in the same field. They're in the psychology field and licensed as the master's level psychotherapist. So I don't know if the BSRB would be made aware of whether the others are under supervision of somebody externally. And it seems like that would be something that they'd be required to do.
So yes, when a person, I mean, we don't get it right off the bat, and it does not have to be in your own profession. The person providing direction can be any clinical licensee from any profession. So that makes it easier for to find someone to provide direction. And when every time a person renews their license, we ask the question, if you require a license to be in your job, then who is the person you're under supervision? And if you're not under supervision, who's the person providing direction?
Okay.
And so that should be in our records.
Okay, good. So that makes a lot of sense then. So they can function under somebody outside of their license for supervision, but not if they're working toward a higher level clinical license. They have to be under somebody that is LCPC.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
well, in the interest of time, maybe we can go to that last question on the survey, if that's okay with you, Laura.
Absolutely.
Okay. That last question on the survey we're going to talk about this meeting was sort of our catch-all question. We've done some surveys in the past for social workers, and we got a few comments that people put in for other questions that said, I would have mentioned this, but there wasn't an opportunity. So I did want to, we included a question at the end. It's question 17 for LPCs and 18 for LCPCs that says, do you have any other comments or feedback you think would be helpful for members of the advisory committee to receive when evaluating possible recommendations for changes to the statutes and regulations for the professional counseling profession? So still under the lens of, this information is going to be studied by the advisory committee, and this is the role to offer recommendations on changes to statutes or regulations. But is there any other comments or feedback that people wanted to pass on? And so Also, in the interest of time, I'll just go ahead and instead of framing this, I'll turn it over to you. Looking at the responses from LPCs and LCPCs, what stood out to you, or what surprised you, or what was notable for this question? And I know some people had similar comments from the last question, and you kind of tell that we kept this confidential, and so the answers are not linked. But there were a couple people, if I remember correctly, that said, "See my previous comment." So I
Right.
don't know what that previous comment was for that
Right.
particular person, but we will read them all. And so yeah.
Two big topics, art therapy and AI. And I mean, those are just two that, kept, coming back to. So I just want to put that out there that, obviously we're dealing with AI, but art therapy is something that, it shows up. We don't have to take that on today, certainly, but it's out there. Any other feedback today? So can we revisit these two, questions 16, 17? Can we revisit these at our next advisory committee one more time, just to let people think about what they've heard, and if you look through them, to glean more ideas? I think there's a lot of really good, nutrient-rich information in there about how we can improve.
Yeah, and I think we can continue to study the reports, and we can continue to look, and if you have any other, I think we tried to cover most of the open-ended questions, but I'm not sure that we got to them all. So if there were things that were still in the report that you wanted to talk about in 2026, we can continue to study this. We just wanted to kind of try to close the book on the draft report, converting that to the final report. And so we should have that by the end of the month. But if there's other topics you want to continue to discuss next year that were coming from the survey responses, I think this is still a great resource for us to continue to look back on. So.
I take my copy of it that David printed out for me on the plane, Jim, when I fly, and I read it. I'm just telling you that to up your game.
Yeah, I'd much rather watch a YouTube video.
Well,
Um,
thank you all for your work on the survey, for sure.
And please thank the staff for compiling this survey. I know it's a lot of work and they continue to work on it. So would you please thank the people that have put their effort and energy into it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And specifically, Tyla and Emma are two staff members that really did a lot of work, summarizing a lot of the information and helping us kind of clean up the document too. So really appreciate their effort on that too.
Thank you. Okay. Continued discussion on regulation of artificial intelligence. Again, who compiled that report that you sent us from the other states? Who?
In the packet of material for today,
Yeah.
I went ahead and just pulled that together and put it together for you. So
Thank you for that. It's extremely helpful to see how other states are grappling with this. So David, go ahead and frame what you want us to do today on this topic.
okay, this is mainly just for some research for you as we continue to look at artificial intelligence. We've talked a little bit about some other states have taken different approaches to it. So I wanted to highlight three laws that have passed this year: one from Illinois, one from Nevada, one from Utah, and then also make you aware of a group that has been created in Utah specifically focused at providing assistance in the area of artificial intelligence. But for that Illinois law that was enacted, House Bill 1806, it's known as the Wellness and Oversight for Psychological Resources Act. It bans AI-only therapy. AI systems cannot independently perform or advertise therapy, counseling, or psychotherapy unless clearly tied to oversight by a licensed professional. It prohibits misleading advertising claims, such as treating AI therapy, chatbot counselor, virtual psychotherapist, and others. It makes professional oversight required. So a licensed mental health provider can use AI tools only if they review and approve any therapeutic output, and AI cannot independently make decisions or interact with clients therapeutically. It allows AI for administration or other support, but only under human review. So tasks like scheduling, transcribing, or summarizing with written revocable client consent. And then it does talk about some fines that would be for violations of that act. In Nevada, there's enacted AB 406, which forbids AI systems from providing mental or behavioral health care or claiming that they can do so. And human providers can still use AI, but only for administrative functions and with independent review of the AI outputs. And in that state, there's also some language there about fines up to $15,000. And then in Utah, there was enacted House Bill 452, which mandates safeguards like clear disclosure that the chatbot is AI, privacy protections prohibiting data sale and other marketing restrictions. It bars AI therapy chatbots from selling or sharing user data. And then, while it's not a law, I wanted to separately note that in Utah in 2024, they created the Office of AI Policy. And it's not just a little one-person office. They actually have 4 staff members, a director, a head of research, a lead AI legal and policy analyst, and a head of stakeholder outreach. And on that website, they offered a 54-page guidance letter that I thought you all would find interesting, called Best Practices for the Use of Artificial Intelligence by Mental Health Therapists. So in your packet, there is a 26-page document that basically is the one I was just talking about, the cover page. I went ahead and behind the cover page, I included copies of those bills that had passed in those 3 states. And then separately, just as an item for you to review, maybe for the next meeting, there's best practices for use of artificial intelligence by mental health therapists from that Utah committee. So just kind of wanted to give this to you for your review. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit more at the next meeting. If you have any initial thoughts today, we can discuss those, but I just wanted to provide you more resources and tools as you continue to talk about these topics.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. This was
Yeah.
really interesting to look over. And I had no idea that states at the government level were developing this stuff. Do you know, is Kansas have anything, or are they working on anything, or has that rumor been around at all? Because I have not heard anything about it here.
So I know earlier this fall we talked about that federal appropriations bill that potentially would have, prohibited states from regulating artificial intelligence for either 5 years or 10 years. And then when that continued to move through, eventually that language got removed. So that was something that maybe states were kind of taking a wait and see approach to. But I think there has been at least one legislative interim committee that has talked a little bit about AI. I forget which committee that is, but I faintly remember maybe one of the oversight committees that met this interim was looking at AI. I don't think there's been any production of bills that have been coming from those committees, but I know there's been some discussion about it. I'm just not sure that Kansas is, where Utah was, where they're to the point to where they're actually creating an office.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're there yet. So.
Yeah, because the one thing that jumped out, and I don't have it in front of me, I think it was in 2 of them at least, it said that could not provide any AI recommendations, therapy, whatever, unless there was oversight by a professional. And I wondered, how do you oversight an AI? Is it like you have to read everything, or just be aware of who's on there? I just wondered how they do that to control the oversight of a program. So that'll be interesting to see how that's defined.
Yeah, I agree. Amanda, I saw that you
Yeah.
unmuted.
I was just going to briefly mention for those of us who probably are in way too many therapist Facebook groups, we were following when Illinois is passing this House bill and just seeing the state affiliates, the Social Work Illinois group and the Illinois Medical Society all supporting this. And I know Illinois therapists were very glad to see AI ban therapy. And of course, other states saying, we hope our state passes this as well. And so I'm just really appreciative that we're talking about it here because I had not seen one therapist that was saying this is a bad thing. So I think I appreciate you sharing what's happening in other states.
Well, as a public member of this committee, I would certainly encourage you all to read the Illinois version. At this point in time, as a member representing the public, I fully support the banning of all AI that does not have direct oversight. And Michael, that means, apparently a bunch of reading, because all this AI creates transcription and notes, which is going to create probably a lot more work for you on a daily basis if this were ever implemented in your practice. But I believe right now that we can't let the horse out of the barn. And it takes us a long time to get regulation implemented in Kansas. It'll take us, if this ever does get implemented, it would take us a long time to reverse it. Should AI ever reach that plateau of fascination where it's just perfect. But I think the removal of human oversight at this point would be a detriment to the public. And I wait to hear what you all, as the licensed professionals in the state, feel about that over the coming months.
Excellent.
Well, and I'd heard, this could be rumor, was there some type of an issue or a lawsuit related to, the GBT? Am I saying that right? Where somebody was using that for kind of a therapeutic process and the program told them to end their life? Is that correct?
Yeah, with there's been a few cases with teenagers. Yeah.
Okay. That's scary.
Very much so. Yeah, and how do you ban, something like Chat GPT from going in? I mean, it's one thing for clinicians to be, not allowed to use it, but how do you stop an AI from using it out in the public? I mean, that's a whole different topic. So
Yeah.
at least as clinicians protecting the public, having strict guidelines about that will mean that, our integrity is protected for how we take care of others.
Well, and again, I'm not against the utilization of programs and things like that for educational purposes and knowledge. I think it's a wonderful thing. But like anything, it can be used good and bad. So I definitely think that oversight piece will be very interesting, and a big topic. I don't even know how they would begin with that, but
Yeah, it feels sometimes like when we talk about it at board meetings, not that we're intentionally kicking the can down the road, because we're not, but it is such a big thing to get your head around. So it's very helpful to see other states and how they're starting to think about it and starting to legislate it. It's helpful.
I'm getting off topic a little bit, but this is an example I thought was humorous to me. Um, I probably all of us have Alexa in our house, and I'd asked Alexa a question and she answered it, and I knew she was wrong. So I told her, I go, Alexa, I think you're wrong. And this is what her response was. My apologies. After further investigation, I did give you incorrect information.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, hey, I won.
I won. And how many people do that? How many people critically think and then challenge their AI?
I
So
don't even, I don't even know how she did further investigation.
yeah, right. Did she come back with the right answer? Right, exactly.
Yeah, she came back. She came back and corrected herself. It was so.
Scary.
She's getting pretty
Well,
smart.
So we will keep thinking about it. We have all this new information, David. Again, thank you for compiling that. And so it'll help us again to give us a way of thinking about this huge topic. Shall we move on to new business?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay, David, go ahead and take that because you go right ahead.
Okay, so at the last meeting, we went through a number of regulations. Just to frame this, the legislature passed a bill maybe 3 years ago or four, that they put all agencies on a 5-year rotation. And so agencies will come up every year, but a different group. And the BSRB is coming up in 2026. And at that point, we will be asked to essentially look at all of our regulations and identify if they are necessary for implementation of state law. And if they are not necessary, are they helpful to implement state law? And then answer some other questions about those regulations. I think it was a method to see, our agencies be doing their due diligence in terms of making sure that language matches up to the statutes, that it's still necessary, If there is unnecessary regulatory language, it should be repealed. And so we wanted to bring all the regulations in front of you as an advisory committee to provide an opportunity to say, do you want to make any changes to these regulations? If not, we would like to be able to say that over the last few years, the advisory committees have had the opportunity to review all of them and make changes, or to say, no, the existing language is good. And so at the last meeting, we went through a number of these, but there was one that we wanted to give you a little bit of extra time to look at, and that was KAR 102-3-14. KAR 102-3-14 has to do with licensee consulting with physicians when determining symptoms of a mental disorder. And this is not an area of the law that we talk about a whole lot, but this regulation does link to statutory language. So it does link to something that's an existing law. So it's not something that we have a lot of flexibility with to change. But we did want to bring it to you just for awareness, and then to give you the opportunity to ask any questions. If you do have questions on this, I can tell you this is not an item that is unique to professional counseling. Well, he just had a discussion at the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee yesterday about this statute, and they were asking if this was unique to Master's Level Psychology, and it's not. It's also in the statutes for the psychology profession, and I think most others. And so, if you're not familiar with this, we wanted to give you the opportunity to take a look at it. I think the waiver language on this is very important too, in terms of linking continuity of care and giving people the option to waive some of that if they desire to do so. But now today, what we're asking you to do is to revisit the language of that KAR 102-3-14 to see if you have any questions, if there were any items that you would recommend be changed. The last time this regulation was modified was in 1999 with an effective date of 2000. So it is one of the older ones. But I did ask Leslie to review all those regulations to look to see if there were any items that she would recommend be changed. So before I open it up, Leslie, did you have any recommended change for this regulation?
No, I don't have any. I thought this was more of a professional, something the professions would need to look at and, their practice and how they do things to see if anything needed to be changed.
And I can just tell you from the master's level psychology profession that looked at their corresponding regulation yesterday, they had a number of questions about it to make sure they understood sort of maybe where this originated. And it sounds like perhaps it originated when the independent level of some of the licenses was being created. So, they had master's level psychology first, and then now we have a tiered level of licensure for most of our professions. So we have, LPCs, but we also have LCPCs, and we have master's level psychologists, but also licensed clinical psychotherapists. And so with that tiered level of licensure, I think when the clear independent level was created as a split from the lower level, I think that's when some of this language was also added to the statutes. And then the regulation kind of clarifies what is necessary to demonstrate some of these things. So do you have any questions about this regulation or any proposed changes to it?
I like the flexibility. May consult, shall not be required to. I think it allows counselors to have flexibility.
Yeah, I agree.
I didn't see anything that, when I think about being a clinician, I didn't see anything that would be a conflict to how I practice ethically.
I'll
I
share
didn't
my
know.
screen here.
Uh-huh.
But sorry, Laura, please continue. I just thought I'd go ahead
No,
and share the screen so we
that's
could
all I had to say. That's
all
all.
look at the language together. So
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't.
Same, Laura. I imagine most clinicians would worry, does this mean I have to consult with every doctor? Because one, that's just not humanly possible. Physicians are not going to respond to us, but also it's not necessary in some cases. It's only if indicated if it's necessary. But that's why I like the language just saying we may, if needed.
Yeah, it's
Sometimes,
flexible.
best practice, yeah, it needs to be flexible.
Yeah. Did anybody else see anything that gets in the way of us, doing our best work as clinicians?
No, I just to add to that, I like the idea that it's not micromanaging the process, but it's also requiring them to act professionally. Um, so I think unless I'm missing something, I think it reads well.
Yeah, I did too. David and Leslie, do you see anything? I mean, you guys are you are in the stats and regs all the time. Do you see anything here that we're missing?
No,
Actually,
just wanted to
I was
provide.
gonna say, I think we should send this to our LMLP Advisory Committee Chair. Because they had asked if consult was defined and it is not in their regulation. So I'm gonna send this to them and see if that would be helpful.
Well, good.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna add, do we need it to update it with the times? It says face-to-face or telephone, and most likely most correspondence is gonna be Zoom like this. So do we need to do some kind of telehealth platform?
That's a good point.
Yeah, that is a good question. Let's see. Let me share my screen again. We can take a look at it together.
It's under B, it says face-to-face telephone or correspondence, and
Yeah.
typically now it's on Zoom, how we have meetings with people.
That's a good point. We just anymore, whenever we see the words face to face, we automatically assume, or at least I automatically assume that includes televideo, but
Yeah.
it may be good to outline that. So it's a
In
good,
1999, they thought you were going to their office.
yeah.
We're
Isn't that
calling them on that
fascinating?
phone.
Okay, here we go.
It's almost weird seeing the word phone. What?
What's that,
Call
Michael?
on the phone.
Hmm. Well, so you said it's in section B here?
Yeah.
Yes, face-to-face contact, telephonic contact, or correspondence.
What would be a good replacement for telephonic contact?
Or could you just take out the face-to-face contact, telephonic contact, and just leave it as correspondence by the licensee with the physician, the physician's assistant, so on and so forth?
Well, I was thinking, face to face, we've really kind of modified the definition of face to face that it includes both in person and also by screen. So, um,
So
Yeah.
face to face will be now accepted as a Zoom or an EHR. Okay.
I think so because
Great.
oh, go ahead.
Is that defined somewhere else, David? Is that
Face
what
to face. I believe so. Leslie, was that in the definition regulation maybe or?
The direct client contact includes, the definition for direct client contact does, yes. Face to face means, in person through electronic means where it's real time. That kind of stuff is in the direct client contact definition.
So it's synchronous. Okay. So it's already in there.
Well, for direct client contact, but is there a definition placed in consultations or supervision that defines that face-to-face?
Well, I think we
I'm
might,
looking now.
yeah, we may benefit from if we don't have one, just adding a sort of a general definition. 'Cause I believe the first regulation starts off with definitions, I believe. So that may be a good place to go ahead and put that. That way, any reference to face in the regulations would be interpreted that way.
I know during COVID it came up a lot, but
Mhm.
what's COVID? What was that?
Face to face by itself is not defined.
Okay. Maybe let's see if maybe putting a definition into the definition regulation. That way, if there was any instances like this, we don't have to modify all the other regulations for that term, but we can just say, that it'll apply across.
Okay. Everybody good with that?
Okay.
See a lot
Well,
of nods.
seems like there's consensus to go ahead and add a definition and model it after the direct client contact example to allow face-to-face to mean either in person or by screen with synchronous. So,
Got it.
okay. Well, we will also make a note that no recommended changes to KAR 102-3-14, but that we did have the opportunity for the advisory committee to review it. And so that way we'll have kind of a point in time for if we review these all again in 3 years, we'll say it's been 3 years since last time we reviewed it. So
Perfect. Thank you for that. And thank you for the discussion, everyone, about that, the feedback. Do we have time to do the Ohio change in licensing requirement?
yeah, I just this is actually kind of an item to discuss maybe at the next meeting, but I'll just kind of frame it for you.
Okay.
Ohio is interesting as a state because they also have tiered licensure for professional counseling. So sometimes when we talk about our model here with 2 different levels, and our lower level is LPC, that's kind of what Ohio has too. I think their higher level is maybe LPCC, so it's just slightly different than ours. But in the past, they have required passage of the NCE for the LPC, and then they've required passage of the NCMHCE. I believe that's the right acronym for the clinical test to get the independent level of license. Well, I included a memo from the executive director of the Ohio Licensing Board, who basically had proposed to their board that they move to a new standard. Some of the states require passage of either examination because in a lot of those states, they only have one level of permanent license and it's the independent level. And so they might have a level below that that's maybe a temporary license or maybe it's a provisional type license. But for us, we have 2 levels of permanent license. And so but what Ohio has decided to do, and I believe it's starting as of January 2026, is they are moving from the requirement of one test at the LPC level and then the passage of a clinical test at the clinical level. So now they are saying to get the LPC license, you can have passed either of the 2 tests. So you can have passed either the NCE or the NCMHCE. And then if you accrue your hours towards a clinical license, then you don't have to pass the clinical exam or whatever test is left remaining. So it's changing from passing 2 tests to essentially passing 1 test when you are getting the clinical level license. And part of the reason for this, as you go through the memo, you can kind of see what they went through is they had a number of people applying for licensure through reciprocity that were from states that only required 1 test. And so they said, a lot of people are getting licensure having passed 1, but our in-state requirement requires passing 2, and a number of other states have just decided to require passage of 1 test over the other. So they decided to move this direction. I'm not necessarily bringing this to you to say we should do this as well, but I do want you to be informed about what other states are doing and why they're doing those things. And so between now and the next meeting, go ahead and review this, and maybe we can discuss it more at the next meeting. So.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Good food for thought.
Mm-hmm.
Should we also approach coursework requirements in the same way?
Yeah, and just for this one, one item I wanted to bring to you. So currently the education regulation, as it states, individuals, if they had attended a KCREP accredited school and received their education from a KCREP accredited counseling program, it says they would need to have satisfied a certain number of courses that are listed in the education regulation. That is also true for individuals who had attended a university that was not KCREP accredited or a program that was not KCREP accredited. However, a lot of the other professions we regulate are moving to a different standard. So essentially the new standard that is already implemented in marriage and family therapy and also that the psychologists are moving to is that if you attended a program that was accredited by the national accrediting body, we don't specifically need to look for those courses that are listed here. If you attended a program that was not accredited, that is why we would need to look for these courses to establish substantial equivalency. So what we wanted to bring to you for discussion at the next meeting to think about is if we wanted to potentially make a change to the regulation for consistency or for other reasons. The potential change could be to say, if you attended a KCREP accredited program that satisfied the total number of hours, we wouldn't need to specifically look for these courses. this type of analysis would be reserved for people who applied, who had not attended a K-CREP accredited school, so that way we could establish substantial equivalency. I think one of the benefits of doing that and making this potential change would be that we could allow K-CREP accredited applicants to move through the process much more quickly.
Yeah.
And it is consistent with the other changes that are happening, the one that's already happened for marriage and family therapy and the one that is happening for psychology. So something to think about for the next meeting, and then we can discuss in more detail and see if you would like to make a recommendation at that time.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the next one is a discussion of topics for 2026. We'll need to move that also to February. But let's do it. I want to make sure that we use the time that we have to really move things forward in ways that feel relevant. So is it okay if we go ahead and do that in February?
Mhm.
Let that be a brainstorming session.
And we've given you a couple things to talk about with the new information on artificial intelligence, the Ohio thing, and also the education regulations. So you already have a few that are primed up, and we can discuss about more topics at the next meeting too.
And information from the survey again, from those topics of the survey. Okay, our discussion for the date and time of our next meeting. It's in February. And David Fire, are you going to do a doodle pro, or do we want to go ahead and set up a standard meeting time?
Well, we have about 3 minutes. So I can just tell you your current time. I think that we've been meeting most of the time has been on the first Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. And so I did want to reach out to everybody at this meeting and see if anybody had a standing conflict with that time. If they did, we could explore other times, but if that's not a conflict for everybody, we could just kind of set that as the standard time and then make adjustments as one-offs if there were conflicts that come up in the future.
Anybody have a conflict?
So David, I may have a conflict on that date, but it would be easier for me to look and send that to you later, if that's okay.
Mhm.
I need to confirm.
Would that be a standing conflict, or would it just be one every once in a while?
Uh, it would be a standing conflict.
Okay.
Let me kind of look at my calendar.
David, can you
but
do
I
a
don't
doodle
have a
pro?
big
Can you do a doodle pro that asks for a standing time? Like, what are some standing times we could choose?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. If anybody had a conflict, we want to make sure that everybody in the advisory committee had the opportunity to attend as many meetings as possible. So I'll put out some standard day and time options, and then hopefully we can find one that there's not a standing conflict for everybody.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it because we'll find something. I mean, surely.
Mhm.
All right, everybody. I just want to tell everybody thank you for all your hard work, and thank you for a great year on this committee. And I hope you have a lovely holiday season. And you have a lot of things to read, so I hope you have some plane rides in your future. And I hope you again have a lovely holiday season. And we'll see you in February. And I need a motion to adjourn.
I wish you the very same, and I'll move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Michael. I need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you,
Amanda Wade.
Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you so much. Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy
you.
holidays. Thank you.
Take care.